A word of prayers, and I'll ask the program manager from UDN, Christine Biringiro, to lead us the prayers.
Let's humble ourselves before the Lord. We stand before Thee, Almighty Father, to thank You for this day, to thank You for the gift of life, and to thank You, my Father, that You have brought us safe and sound to this place. We commit this day unto Your hands. We commit this workshop unto Your hands, my Father. We pray that the deliberations of this day shall be fruitful and shall be relevant to the national development of this country. This we pray, believing and trusting in Your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ.
Thank you so much, Christian. Let's take our seats. So on behalf of Uganda Debt Network, I want to again welcome you all for this dissemination workshop. During this period, we expect to be receiving findings from a study that was commissioned by the UDN, and the title is Building a Gender-Sensitive and Disability-Inclusive Social Protection Systems in Uganda. We have a very distinguished panelist that will be taking us through this. But first of all, allow me to welcome our speakers to join us at the podium. I want to, ED. I want to request the ED of Uganda Debt Network, Mr. Patrick Tumwebaze, to lead the guest today. I will give their profile later on. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much to our panelists. Just to mention that this study was co-funded by UNICEF, and we're very delighted to have the county representative of UNICEF in our midst. So as I was saying, we were delighted to have the county representative, UNICEF, Dr. Munir Safeldin. He has been in Uganda with UNICEF since January 2021. Doctor, you're most welcome. We're very delighted to have you amidst us this morning. We also have a gentleman that needs no introduction, basically. Professor Suruma is a household name in this country. Professor Suruma is Chancellor of Makerere University. He's a former finance minister in this country, and also, as well as a member of the board of directors for Uganda Debt Network. Professor Suruma, you're most welcome. As I mentioned, we have a study that was commissioned by UDN, and the consultants who led this study are represented here, and the head of this team was Professor Paul Bukulichi from Makerere University. I first want to start by congratulating you upon your recent promotion from associate professor to professor. We applaud you for for the milestone achievement. Professor works with the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Makerere University, and specifically has been a senior lecturer, social work. He will tell us more details, but it's a long, long period of service, and I'm privileged to have been one of his students way, way back, about 20 years ago. You're most welcome, Professor. Yes. Later on, we expect to be joined by none other than the Honorable Minister for Gender, Labor and Social Development. She will be joining us here as we formally launch the book or this study that was commissioned by UDN. The Honorable Minister will be joining us and will let all of you know when she arrives for this particular function. I want to, in a special way, thank all the partners who have made this study possible. As I mentioned, UNICEF, and it was also co-funded by the EU, the European Union, International Labour Organization, ILO, the Global Coalition for Social Protection and Flows, and they're also represented here. And as I mentioned, our partners, NTV, and we're live on NTV this morning for this session. So thank you so much. I want to believe that we all have the program with us. We will make some slight alterations in the program, but not very significant for now. We will just have welcome remarks. Welcome remarks from Professor Siruma. As I mentioned, Professor Siruma is a household name in this country. He has served this country diligently in several areas or sectors. He was Minister for Finance. He was a presidential advisor, senior presidential advisor. But most importantly, Professor Siruma is the Chancellor of Uganda's premier university, Makerere University, and we're very delighted to have you, Mr. Professor Sir, to welcome in this session. Professor is my colleague at the Uganda Debt Network, where he has been a board chairperson for over 6 years, and currently is a member of the board. Professor, you're most welcome to present your keynote remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter, for your kind introduction. Honorable Minister is on the way. I recognize her even before she arrives. And any members of Parliament who may be here, members of the Diplomatic Corps, which includes our beloved Dr. Munir. I'm not sure I can manage your second name, but hope you'll forgive me if I stop there. And of course, Professor Paul Kuruchi, our speaker and consultant. And the justices and members of the judicature, the government officials, the Minister of Gender, Minister of Local Government, and other ministries who have supported this work. We welcome you, and it's a pleasure to see you. And I see you, I think we have good presentation from Makerere University. I recognize you as my colleagues. Thank you for coming and for supporting this important research. The members of the board of Uganda Network and the executive director of Uganda Network, thank you very much also for being involved in social protection and for inviting me to be here. All of you in your distinguished capacities, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great privilege to be here this morning to talk about what I consider to be one of the leading problems of our country, and I think of many other countries. Social protection. I will speak generally about in my remarks about social protection, or what some other countries call social security. When I was in my first year as a student at Fordham University in New York, I got an opportunity to work at the library. I could get a little extra income. I think I was getting $20 a month or something like that. It was quite small. But when I got my first check, I found that they had deducted, I think, $2. And I was very, very upset. $2 out of 20 is a substantial deduction. So I went to make a formal protest for the deduction. And the lady who was in charge didn't seem to be impressed by my complaint. She said, that's Social Security. I said, what is Social Security? She said, everybody who works in America has to pay Social Security, has to get a deduction. I said, me, I'm not going to live here. I'm just come to study. And as soon as I finish studying, I'm going back home. So please give me my money back. She said, no. So I angrily left. And to cut a long story short, when my age reached 65, I saw money coming in my account, the Social Security. And I was very happy, and I'm still getting it. Even as we speak, something comes. But that was in 1966, when the deductions were being made. This is 2023. It's not a lot, but I'm very happy to get it. Now, the subject of social security and social protection, when Vice President Specioza Kazbewa called me in and said, I want you to write a paper on social security. I'm not sure why she selected me, but You don't say no to the vice president. You do what he or she tells you. So I did some work, some research on the subject, and I even went to Germany, because the beginnings of social security or social protection, I think, are reputed to be in West Germany, or in Germany. It was West Germany at the time, but it's Germany. And I talked to the director of their social security there. And he told me words that I have never forgotten, and which I keep repeating wherever I have an opportunity to talk about social security or social protection. He said, for us in Germany, we've decided, agreed, that no German citizen should be permitted to live in a subhuman state. Subhuman meaning less than human state. So I don't know how you define it for yourself, we should define it for us, but there is a state of human decency that we should not allow our citizens to fall below that state. And therefore, we can judge a society by how well it is able to care for its citizens, so that no citizen falls below what we would consider to be human standard. When you become subhuman, less than human, if any of us, any of our people is in that state, we cannot be proud, we cannot be and shouldn't be happy, and we should know that something is fundamentally wrong and needs to be put right. And for those of you who are religious, I remind you the book of Matthew, chapter 25, verses 31 to 46, where Jesus says that when I come to judge on final judgment, I'll separate the sheep from the goats. I'll put the sheep on the right and the goats on the left. And to the sheep I'll say, well done, good and faithful servant. I was hungry, and you fed me. I was naked, and you gave me something to wear. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink, and so on. So we are surrounded by people who are naked, people who are hungry, people who have no shelter, and so on. People who are sick, and they have no means to treat themselves. And the question is, as a society, what are we doing? And what must we do so that no Ugandan is living in a subhuman state? And I don't need to elaborate. You go around, you see our streets, you see our rural areas, you know what I'm talking about. We are far, far from reaching a standard where every Ugandan, every child, every woman, abled and disabled, is living in an acceptable state of human decency. And that's the problem. Now, I'm glad that UDN, together with UNICEF and Gender and local government and others, have attempted to tackle this problem. It's a beginning, and a beginning is important, starting. And when I looked at the research, I was actually surprised to see the multiplicity of policies on the subject, policies and even laws that have been made to address the problem of social protection. But as in so many other areas of our country, the problem appears to be implementation. It's one thing to make a policy, it's another to implement it. Uganda has no shortage of policies. Parliament can make laws, ministries can make regulations, agencies and so on, but implementation. So I'm glad that there is some degree of consciousness of the need for social protection. When the $2 were being deducted from my salary, at least some action was being taken so that in the future, the money that I had been deducted would be the source of social protection, the source of income for myself. It's my own money, which has been saved over the years. And now I'm able to get it. Other people may use the private sector through investments. And indeed, in many, many countries, there are companies which specialize in collecting savings and investing them for individuals and families so that when in the old age or in case of problems, they are able to fall back on that money. But there is also a public responsibility, government, to take decisive action to ensure that indeed there is a fallback. And this is a problem we are struggling with. Social Security Fund has grown and it's doing well, but it's catering for a relatively small number of the people who are in need. And of course, it's mainly covering the formal sector, but our informal sector is very big. The people who don't have salaries, who don't have anywhere to deduct. So we have to, although the law has been amended to start to accommodate the people in the informal sector, we have a long way to go to have programs that can cater for all the people. Now, the parish development model, we all should get interested, not because the government says so, but because we all live in a parish somewhere. So it's not about government, it's about the people in the community that we call the parish. And the question is, how can we, with the 5,000 in such and such a parish, in your parish, in my parish, is there a way that we can be organized in such a way that every child in our parish, every disabled person in our parish, every aged person in our parish somehow is taken care of. Forget, when it's macroeconomics, where we think of the whole country, very few of us can think of a program that covers the whole of Uganda and covers it well. In making policies, we pretend that we are legislating for the whole country, and now the policy has been passed, the speaker puts it, so done, this is done. It's not done at all. Does it ever reach the person in the village? So I think in that sense, the parish development model is attempting to say, let's go down to the communities, to the villages, and let's see if there is a way to organize the community so that every person, every Ugandan is now known and is being helped in one way or another. That's not a government problem, or it's a government problem, of course, but it is our problem as citizens in the community to find a way to organize ourselves and uplift our standard of living. Just as we have in the villages, we have, for example, burial programs, we organize funds, so when someone dies, we're able to bury them decently and properly. There's no one who dies and there's no mechanism for burying them. But we need to also say, in such and such a home, somebody is 90 years old and there's no one to look after them. What do we do as a community? So implementation, in my view, is where the problem now is. For 6 years, I was heading the Prime Minister's delivery unit intended to improve service delivery. And it's a very complicated process. We started by taking 20 districts in the east, attempting to ensure that teachers are teaching in primary schools, the UPE, that health workers are working, and keeping data records of who is at work and who is not. And then we found the records we are getting were not correct, so we had to introduce machines, biometrics, so that they don't lie. Because we found that even with the, for example, with the UPE, the head teachers were more absent than the teachers themselves. Now, if the head teacher is absent 60% of the time, how would he record that the teachers are present? The absence of teachers was 40% of the time. So we have to introduce systems to aid implementation. And I think that by breaking down the problem to go down to communities so that the problem becomes more manageable, we have a record of all the people in the parish, children, girls, men, adults, aged. We have these records and we have some arrangement within the community. And then when the government comes to help, fine, but they find us also attempting to do something. I'm not saying this to excuse the government from its responsibilities, but merely being pragmatic, because if you say you are sitting, you do nothing, you are waiting for the government, you're going to keep waiting and you'll wait for a very long time. So, brothers and sisters, I want to really commend the UDN, I want to commend the Ministry of Gender, the Ministry of Local Government, commend UNICEF, commend the European Union, and all who are coming together to support this effort, to commend the consultants for the work they've done. I looked at the detailed research, it's quite impressive. it's a beginning. It's a beginning. I think they've covered 80 districts. I think now we have 146 districts. And even then, the degree of detail required, because it's no longer a macro problem, it comes down to you as an individual. You are now 90 years old. What happens to you? Where do you get water? How do you go to the toilet? And where do you get food? It comes down to each of us. Something happens to you, you have an accident, you have lost an arm, or you lost a leg, or you can't remember anything. What happens? So social protection can unite all of us because it's a problem for everyone. At some point in life, there will come a time when you need others to help you. But rather than the old idea of the extended family has been overextended. And now the extended family is no longer able to look after everyone because the problem is too big. And so we have to find a new solution. So I wanted to challenge all of us, first of all, to agree the principle that human dignity is inviolable. We cannot and we should not allow human dignity to be compromised. We should protect human dignity, all of us. And once we agree with that principle, then the implementation, the challenge of Uganda and other African countries and the whole world, I believe, is how we make policy, how do we go from policy to implementation. That challenge is big. In my book on advancing the Ugandan economy, I have touched on the issue of how, and I'm concluding now, so don't worry. I have touched on the issue of financing social security and social protection. I looked at two places, Alaska, the state of Alaska in America, and Norway. And I found that they have put in place programs for social protection using funds that they obtained from oil. They are all oil-producing places. And these programs appear to be working extremely well. The idea that the oil money is everybody's money, it's our money. And if it is our money, why can't we take a portion of that money and make sure that every citizen gets a portion of it when they are in need, when they cannot access basic needs of life. And so in Alaska, I think they take about 20% of the oil money and give it to professional investors, and then the proceeds from that investment is distributed to the citizens of Alaska every year. And similarly in Norway, they take a proportion of the money from oil and they distribute the proportion of the profits are again distributed to people who are old, who need to be protected because they are disabled or old and so on. So the idea is that, and now how did this happen? I think in Alaska, they had a referendum. People voted that yes, a portion of the oil money should be set aside for social protection. And that's what was done. And that's what's being done. I think that's what we need in Uganda. Because if we leave all the money in the hands of government, I don't need to tell you what will happen. You will not see it. But if we say, let a proportion be set aside so that every Ugandan has a share in that investment, and he gets a share of the profits coming from that investment, then at least all of us will get something from this oil. And the chapter in my book is discussing oil as a blessing or a curse, because we know that in many cases oil has become a curse rather than a blessing. So I want to challenge the lawyers here and those who are listening online. Let us organize a referendum. The elections are coming. Let's put something there that says that a proportion of the oil money must be set aside for social protection of all Ugandans. Why don't you clap? We can't expect that the money will come from Europe or will come from where for our social protection. We have to protect ourselves first. So, with these few remarks, I hope I will not be arrested. I want to thank UDN for inviting me and for inviting you. Thank you for coming to participate in this very, very important subject of social security, social protection, so that every Ugandan can have a life of dignity. And we shouldn't have people eating from the garbage cans and people lying naked on the side of the streets because nobody cares or is able to do something about it. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Let's give another round of applause to Professor Suruma. Thank you very much, Professor, for your wonderful remarks. I wanted to make to just comment on a few takeaways from what Professor has said, but your closing remarks were more scary because you are worried that you could probably be arrested because of your remarks. So if Professor Suruma can be worried of that, how about myself? So I will choose not to make any comments on what you just said. But we really appreciate you, Professor, for the remarks. I just want to remind our audience and those who are following us live on NTV that today we are here for a dissemination workshop, and the professor has already given you highlights of what we should expect when this report is formally presented to us by the consultant who did this study. Professor Paul Bukuluchi from Makerere University, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, is the lead researcher for this study, and we're thankful that he's with us here, and we'll be making the presentation shortly. We are live on NTV, and for our followers, we want to assure you that you should actively participate, share your feedback. I think our friends from NTV have shared with you the hashtag that you should use to join the discussions. After the presentation, certainly we'll have a plenary session where the rest of us who are in this hall will actively participate and give our views. But for this moment, I want all of us to welcome the lead researcher in this, Professor, just recently promoted from associate professor to professor at Makerere University. You're most welcome to give us your findings. I think we are all looking forward to the results of this study. Professor Suruma has highlighted a few things, and we can't wait to hear it from you. Thank you. Thank you again. We'll just have some slight alteration to the program. Before we have the report presented to us, we want to give an opportunity to the county representative, UNICEF, to give a few remarks to the audience because he has some other very urgent issue that has come up and that requires his personal presence. So I want to take this opportunity to welcome Dr. Munir to make his remarks. Thank you. Okay, can do it from there. Thank you.
Professor Suruma, Professor Paul, the Executive Director of Uganda Debt Network, the board members of UDN, members of the parliament who may be here, members of the academia, members of the media, members of civil society organizations, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. It's a very great pleasure for me and for my UNICEF colleagues, and I believe also other UN agency colleagues who are here, to be with you here for the launching of this extremely important report. And I would like to congratulate UDN and the consulting group for concluding this report. It's an important report about building gender-sensitive and disability-inclusive social protection systems in Uganda. Professor Suruma already spoke to us about the importance of these systems. And I would like to add to the very valuable remarks he made about the need for social protection. I want to add a few remarks from the UNICEF point of view to highlight why we need urgently effective social protection system in Uganda. If you look at the percentage of children who are living under income poverty, it's about 23%. 23% of all children in Uganda are living under income poverty. That's almost 1/4 of the children in the country. And if you look at poverty in a broader way, beyond the income poverty, looking at multidimensional poverty, the percentage of children who are living under multidimensional poverty, which means deprivation of water, sanitation, school, health care, the percentage is scaring. It's 44%, almost half of the children. What does it mean? It means many children, almost half of the children of Uganda, do not have decent childhood, do not have decent livelihood. And this is very evident if you look at the labor force survey that was published very recently. Out of the 15 million children who are supposed to be going to school, 6.2 million 6.2 million children in Uganda are in the labor force. They are deprived of their childhood, including education. As Professor Suruma mentioned, you just walk across the streets and you see the number of children who are begging, the number of children who are spending the night in the streets. All of this tells us how important social protection is. But if you look into your own situation, you will see that if you have an elderly parent, it's you who are paying for them, for their health, for their care. If you have an extended family with unemployed individuals, most probably because of the extended family tradition, it's you who are bearing the financial burden of the poverty in the extended family. All of this could be resolved if there is an effective social protection system in Uganda. And the social protection system is possible and it is affordable. And that's why I think the theme of the session today about the synergies between social protection and financial management is really important. The synergies are very clear. If you need and you want to have an effective social protection system, you need the money to be raised. Where does the money come from? It comes from financial management, for public finance. If you need equity in distributing money that is available for social protection, it's again the public finance management that makes it possible. If you need accountability for the use and the creation of results from spending money on social protection, it's the public finance management that makes it possible. So the synergies are very clear. The synergies are there. So I think this is a very important theme, and I hope and I request the researchers, but mainly also UDN, that hopefully in a few months or a year, let us say, we meet again to look at what has been implemented of the recommendations of your study. As Professor Suruma mentioned, there are so many laws, there are so many policies, there are so many regulations, but many of them are not implemented. But we want to make sure, with his advice, with his support, that the recommendations of this study are implemented and would make difference in the lives of people, especially children, when we are able to meet here again. I once again would like to congratulate UDN, the ministries, Ministry of Gender, Ministry of Local Government, and all government departments that have been involved in this, all the academia members who have been involved in this study. And we look forward for more partnerships with all of you for the better and for significant improvements in the lives of children and other vulnerable people. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for having me and my UNICEF colleagues with you here. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Let's just give another round of applause to Dr. Munir. Thank you very much for your remarks and for especially that commitment that we really need to implement the recommendations. I will not jump into the recommendations yet before we have the presentations, but for sure I think that's one thing that we all need to have our minds focused on, to see how this can be recommended or whether it goes to the same trajectory that Professor Suruma earlier mentioned on, that we are not short of policies. The problem is implementation. And we hope that as individuals, as a country, we should start changing this narrative, that we keep on formulating very good policies, I must say, but without any attempts to implement these policies. Dr. Munir, thank you so much for your presentation. And I will be leaving to attend to other issues, as I mentioned earlier. But our colleagues from UNICEF, please, you ensure that you stay around and keep representing UNICEF in this platform. I also want to use this opportunity to once again thank especially the leadership. During the introduction, we had, I think, a number of chief administrative officers and district officials, especially from the 8 districts where this study was commissioned. Of course, you are going to get the details of the districts. A few of them already did introduce themselves. But we want to thank you all for making this hardest trip from all your locations. I noticed the cow of Napak is here, the cow of Kamweng is here, and you can imagine the distances that they all traveled to be with us for this workshop. So I want to thank you all. At this juncture, I want to take the opportunity to welcome Professor Bukulochi Paul to give us the highlights of this report. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremony, and my former student who was among our very brightest and pragmatic students. No wonder where you are now. All protocol observed, but I want to recognize Professor Suruma, the Chancellor of Makerere University, as well as a board member of UDN. I want to recognize the principal, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Hikile. Those are my bosses. And I'm here as a resource person from Makerere University. We don't stay there in the ivory tower, but we come to interface with the civil society, the media, and the communities as a way of the ivory tower giving back to the community through community engagement and partnership. So I'm very happy to be here. I want to recognize all the dignitaries. I think you have been recognized by all the speakers. So people from the government ministries that are represented, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, from the National Planning Authority, from the Ministry of Local Government, from the district local governments. I recognize all of you, as well as members of the civil society and media. I'll go straight to save a bit of time to our study that was conducted in partnership with UDN. This was a partnership between Uganda Data Network, Makerere University, and the Applied Research Bureau, the firm that was part of doing this work. I want to pick off from where Professor Suruma and Dr. Munira, from the country representative of UNICEF, left off this discussion by clearly stating that human dignity is not negotiable, but it is something that has to be pursued with all that is within us. So I think that it is our huge responsibility, all of us, to make sure that children in childhood, during adolescence, during adulthood, during old age, following the life cycle approach, that we maintain that human dignity. And social protection is a great entry point, provides the pathways for us to think through how we maintain human dignity throughout the life cycle. Actually, I shouldn't start from childhood. I should start right from conception. because even there things can go wrong, and we could lose children, or we could have children that are not healthy because we have not ensured human dignity of the mothers while they are pregnant. So just again to underscore that it was a pleasure to lead conducting this study, and of course recognize UNICEF for funding this study. Thank you. So that was a preamble. When I was listening to Professor Sruma, what came to my mind is that if we are not intentional at strengthening systems for social protection at all levels, we might end up becoming a state within a state. So you find that Paul, in his family, is almost a state. He's providing everything for his family. But then the issue is, this Paul who is claiming to be a state, there are times come when he becomes infirm and frail that he cannot do that. So if we are not intentional at strengthening systems for social protection at different levels, then we are in trouble, because we cannot keep being strong and formidable, and there is that time when we are at risk and vulnerable and infirm. And so we need to be intentional at making sure that we have stronger systems for social protection. Now, the issue of gender and disability in the context of social protection are extremely important, because you can imagine, in addition to all the other burdens we carry, in addition to all the other challenges that we face, if we include aspects of vulnerability around disability, that means that in addition to all the other baggage we carry and that we have to cope with, there is disability. And in addition to all the other things risks that we have to face, there are issues around gender. And here, gender, we are talking about those relationships between men and women, and the relationships which are skewed in terms of power relations, in terms of access resources, in terms of decision making, in terms of even freedom of mobility, which are very pertinent in terms of increasing risk and vulnerability. So if one gender has power over the other gender is just going to increase its experience of risk and vulnerability. And then, of course, disability being a very central concept, and that all of us are prone to disability. Maybe today I'm feeling that I'm not, but the following day, anything can just happen and you are there. So how are we, in other words, every one of us should be concerned about disability, and every one of us actually should be concerned about gender. If we can go to the next slide, just to set the background for this. Sorry. Yeah. So this study basically intended to do an assessment looking at our social protection systems to see the extent to which they were gender and disability inclusive. And I'm glad, Professor Sroma, you set the stage. So I'll just go specifically to talk about issues mostly around gender. But I want to note that when we consider issues of gender, we recognize that women and girls and certain categories of men and boys disproportionately affected by shocks, by risk, by vulnerability at all stages of the life cycle. And we have also to appreciate that with the COVID-19 pandemic and with the economic recession that we are experiencing, that has even taken vulnerability further. Because you can imagine if you were already disproportionately affected by risk, by vulnerability before COVID-19, then we are coping with the effects of COVID-19, including us having the longest lockdown almost in the world, because we had very restrictive measures in order to, as we were responding to the effects of COVID-19 and the economic recession that is happening. It means that people have been pushed to more risk and vulnerability. And of course, then we ask ourselves the question, to what extent is our social protection shock responsive? So the whole domain around shock responsive social protection then becomes important. But when we are speaking about issues of gender, then the question is going to be, and I'm setting the stage, the question is going to be, our social protection systems gender blind, or are they gender responsive and gender transformative? I think that is a question that we should keep in mind. Even as I present, I'm going to take you through the key highlights of the findings. At the back of your mind, the issue is to say, yes, we know about these relationships between men and women, boys and girls that are skewed in terms of power relations, in terms of decision-making, in terms of access to and control over resources, in terms of gender roles, with the women taking, and the girls taking a huge burden of care and unpaid care work. How are we taking all those into account as we do programming for social protection? That is what the study was getting into. And knowing that disability adds another angle of vulnerability, to what extent are we making sure that as we build our social protection systems, the issue of disability, and we know that disability is not just a simple term, we know that disability is complex, that there are different types of disability and they mean different risks and vulnerability. We also know that there are people who have multiple and severe disability. So do we have one blanket program for disability, or do we take into account all these issues? And are we applying the medical mode of disability, which is very narrowly focused on treatment and management, or are we adopting the social mode of disability that is more comprehensive and looks at risk factors for disability across different levels, the individual, the household, the family, the community, and the society, and it tries to look at how to remove barriers, environmental barriers that are prohibiting people with disability from being socially included, economically included, and to be included in the political processes for them to have voice and accountability. So these are things we'll be looking at. So maybe next stage, if you don't mind. Next slide. So when we look at the social protection system in Uganda, we are guided by the National Social Protection Policy 2015, which categorizes social protection into pillars. There is the social security pillar. I'm glad Professor Suruma was speaking about social security, and then there is the pillar for social care, and under that we have several other categorizations. But the point I want to make here is that the social policy, National Social Protection Policy recognizes that there are complementary programs that work alongside the core social protection interventions, because without investing in water and sanitation, for example, without investing in education, housing, employment, health, livelihoods, infrastructure development, to complement addressing risk and vulnerability, then you are only doing part of the job. So as we build the systems for social protection, it means that we have to make sure that apart from having social protection programs that fall within that definition, we need to see the synergies and linkages between them and the other complementary programs that are extremely important in responding to the major functions of social protection, one which is prevention, another one which is, promotive, another one which is actually protection. So we just have to make sure that as we approach social protection, we are approaching it more broadly. Next slide. So you have the report, and here I will just be summarizing a few highlights. The details you'll find in the report. The objectives that we went out to investigate were to establish the extent to which the existing legal and policy framework for social protection is gender sensitive and disability inclusive. The other one was to look at the fiscal allocation of social protection and the extent to which they are gender responsive and take into account disability, and then to assess the extent to which the existing targeting mechanisms for the social protection programs also take into account issues around gender and disability across the life cycle, and of course to share learnings and recommendations. Next slide. We had a mixed methods approach to conducting this study. So when we say mixed methods, it can be quite complex in academia, but here it only meant that we were adopting the qualitative approach, where you talk to people to get their human experiences, to get their opinions, using a guide that is more liberal. So you allow them to tell you their story. And the quantitative approach, which is quite more defined and structured. So we combine both of those methods. So in our approach, we first of all did desk review in order to look at the reports, the policies, the existing studies, and then we went ahead also to conduct key informant interviews, focus group discussions, but also did issue out questionnaires to beneficiaries of the of selected programs, because we could not cover every other program, but selected programs. We conducted interviews in different districts, as is indicated on the next page, on the next slide. Thank you. So we went to 8 districts, and these districts basically were selected to represent the different key social protection interventions. So they may not be representative in terms of regions. We tried to do that, but we were guided because we wanted to get feedback on the existing programs and how they integrate disability and the issues of gender. So, we talked to different categories of people who play a key role in implementation of social protection programs, as well as male and female beneficiaries and people living with disability. Next slide. Yeah, we could just go to the next slide. Yeah. So I will start this presentation by looking at the existing targeting mechanisms for our key social protection interventions, and how through this assessment, we looked at how do these try to be intentional at addressing gender and disability. One of our premier programs is the Senior Citizens Grant, a program actually that targets mostly the elderly. Before, it was targeting from 65 years and above, but during the rollout, it now targets those aged 80 years and above. This program basically uses what we call categorical targeting, because it is just about the age cutoff. If you are 80 and above, you benefit. Whether you are male or female, or you have a disability, that is not a major concern. The most important eligibility criteria is age, being 80 years and above. Now, Does that alone make the program gender and disability inclusive? Yes, to some extent it does, but we have to understand that gender sensitivity, you remember when I started to discuss that you have to see, is the program gender transformative? Is it gender blind or it is gender neutral? So we see that the program is not discriminatory according to sex or according to someone's gender, but also what we saw with this program is that, in terms of body politics, it is coming to almost 60% of the beneficiaries are women. That is good from just that perspective of having a threshold for women and men. But the question is, there are other aspects that are very important to look at that cause vulnerability in relation to gender that the program is still grappling with. One of the things that I really notice as important is that guidelines have step-by-step guidelines for integrating gender in social protection programs have been developed by the Ministry of Gender, and there is a strategy for promoting gender equity within social protection. But as Professor Sroma alluded, the issues we have all these guidelines and policies, but to what extent, the extent to which they are put in practice, the extent to which they are implemented is still the issue that we have to grapple with. But that good start of having the guidelines for step-by-step integration of social protection, of gender into social protection, makes the program, at least theoretically, relatively gender transformative. But until we see that in practice, we need to monitor and see that it is put in practice. Then we can say that SAGE is gender transformative. The issue is that much as we have more women, but issues of gender roles, skilled gender roles, and the risk that causes for women. Say if I'm male, if we have a male and a couple and we are male and female, and you all get the 25,000, if most of the burden of care is being taken care of by the woman, then there is no equity there, because we are getting the same money, but my burden of care, that is defined by culture and social norms, by my being a woman, then makes that skewed. So what do we think about that in terms of being gender transformative? Are we taking care of the fact that already through the social and gender norms, access to and control of resources is skewed towards men, decision-making power is skewed towards men, but also the gender roles are skewed with the burden of care being carried by women. Next slide. When we look at issues of disability, it suffices to note, and I need to get again the statistics right, but around 13% of people who are in SAGE, in the Senior Citizens Grant, have disability. And you know there is that relationship between age and disability. So once you are 8 years and older, the likelihood that you would have disability is very high. And so the program sort of by design, given that it is targeting that age range, in a way it is reaching out to people with disability. But the question is does disability inclusion mean only taking in people with disability? Or it means that we have to do more, especially when we look at the social model. So how much is the program working with other programs or other interventions to make sure that the social and environmental barriers to people with disability are taken into account, such that it is not just ticking off, oh, we have these numbers of people with disability, this number of beneficiaries, but going beyond that, following the social model to address the barriers in the society around disability. Next slide. Another program into which we took interest was the labor labor-intensive public works programs. Actually, the guidelines for implementation of the labor-intensive public works clearly stipulates that at least 50% of the direct, that at least 50% of the direct beneficiaries shall be female. So at least from that perspective, theoretically in terms of the guidelines, I think we find that the program is thinking about women. Again, but we want to see beyond the threshold of having women on board as beneficiaries. Is there anything else that the program tries to do to be sensitive to the gender norms that put women at risk, for example, and girls at risk? So the other aspect is that 20% shall come from households with vulnerable groups, including persons with disability. So in that regard, in terms of representation, I think the guidelines are doing something. And when we followed up by talking to people, beneficiaries, and in the districts, we found that actually these programs to a large extent are being followed. One of the things that was also exciting is that the process of selection was taking into account the issue of age, gender, disability, and vulnerability indicated by the income poverty status. The other aspect was also that they are taking into account the needs of both men and women, recognition of the time poverty of women. So they make sure that as they allocate tasks, they make sure that they are taking into account the gender roles of the women to make sure that there is time for childcare and also that there is time for their other domestic responsibilities that they have to take care of. So in a way, this program was quite gender transformative. And even the tasks are assigned according to the capabilities. Next slide. Sorry. Yeah, these are some quotes from beneficiaries. You know, when you do a qualitative study, you need people to speak. And maybe I can just read one of the quotes here that was responding to the question by saying that everyone benefited, whether old or young, whether you had a disability or not. And for the elderly and people with the disability, their work was to distribute water to those working and carrying babies of the breastfeeding mothers at site. Women were given lighter tasks. So they were trying to say that within their locality, let us say the parish, they would make sure that they are sensitive to the needs of women and the needs of and the situations and the needs of people with disability. And they did whatever they can at their level to try and make sure that that is taken into account. The other issue, but that we have to take into account, that was raised by participants, was that there is still that issue of worker burden-related issues, the issue of time poverty. So that limits women from participation, because when we did mapping of gender roles, if I was on a weighing scale, those of women could just take you and you follow. But those of men, you could stay more or less balanced. So use the weighing scale as an example in the focus group discussions for people to tell us, and you could find the scale was so imbalanced women. So when this issue came up, I was surprised, the issue of time poverty. And you need some time to participate in the labor-intensive public works by the nature of their name and tasks. Marital control and decision-making at household level, again, because of issues of power relations, the husband could simply say, you are not going anywhere, and that was it. And that is according to the social norms. You must obey your husband, otherwise the social sanctions against that are very high. In some cases, they told us that it could even lead to divorce, and then with all the implications that go with that. Or it can lead to violence. It can lead to violence, which is problematic. So the whole issue around also social norms that prohibit women from engaging in certain tasks. So when you do a social protection programs, it is important to pay attention to the social and gender norms prevailing in an area, so that even when you have labor-intensive public works, you are also engaging the community in social norm change and gender transformative programming. Next slide. We did take interest, and this might be into the public service pension scheme. As I told you, we selected some of the candidate programs to look at and see whether their systems are being gender responsive and responding to disability. One of the issues, of course, the public service scheme is tax financed, non-contributory pension that covers public service employees. So at the very first glance, just commenting on what Professor Suruma said, is that what proportion of Ugandans are employed in the public service? Do you know the proportion? It is a small proportion, probably about oscillating between 5 and 10% of the population. So much as it is a helpful scheme, like how many people would get a chance to work in a public library the way Professor Suruma did. So very few, just a handful. So much as this is good, but from its very nature, since most of the women and most of the men at risk work in the informal sector, and most of the people living with disability work in the informal sector, it means that they are already excluded from this. So just to start like that, but to appreciate the fact that also in most cases, women in the public service are occupying relatively lower positions, mid-level to lower positions, and yet your pension also depends on the salary that you on the salary that you get. So if you're occupying relatively low positions, that also has implications on how much you collect. If Professor Suruma was, when he was working in the library, was earning $1,000, what he would be collecting now would be much bigger. So it depends on what level you are and what you are doing and your position. And we know that in the public service, research has indicated that most of the top positions are held by men. And you also don't find so many people with disability holding those positions. So we have to think about that. In terms of disability, this scheme provides a range of benefits, including, of course, retirement pension, a disability benefit, a survivor's benefit, and an early retirement or redundancy payment. So in that way, it is taking into some dimension of disability to a certain extent, but we have to also understand that there is also a possibility of early retirement for staff who reach 45 years of age, and they can benefit from this. And however, like I said, given that few people with disability enter the labor force, and hence public service, this leaves out many people with disability. Next slide. Our very popular program, the National Social Security Fund, is the other one we took interest in. And by the way, you'll find quite a lot in the report. I'm just trying to give the high-level issues here. So this is a mandatory contribution, a provident fund. And it protects employees in the formal sector again. Recently, like also Professor Suruma alluded to it, there was that tweak within the law, within the act, to enable people from the informal sector to participate. But when we talked to when we talked to people in the community, they were like, they don't know about this. So much as the law has changed, it has not yet been popularized. So people in the informal sector, where most of the women work, most of the people with disability work, are not yet benefiting from this scheme. Yes, the opportunity structure is now there, but the mobilization, sensitization of people to know that this structure exists is not there. And you know, there are also myths and misperceptions about the fund, given some of the media coverage and what goes on social media. All these need to be dealt with. So a clear community engagement strategy to attract the informal sector to save with this fund is necessary. Next slide. There are also the other grants that are specifically for people with disability, but these, the way they operate like livelihood programs rather than traditional classical social protection interventions. For example, this is provided through the Ministry of Gender, one-off grants to groups that are doing different activities to generate income. So we did not find a grant, for example, similar to the senior citizens grant, where there is a monthly stipend for people with disability, the way there is a monthly stipend for the older persons. So, and yet, many of our respondents were saying that is the kind of arrangement that would ideally work for them. So we need to start thinking of how we transform some of these grants into to have a more social protection lens rather than a livelihood lens, because there are people with severe disability that are excluded from these groups when they form. So when we were in the districts, people with disability were saying that if you have a severe disability or multiple disabilities, the chances that you would get into these groups for income generation is quite limited. And so there is need to be intentional at how we solve that problem. Next slide. Again, these are quotes. I will read just one, that women are supposed to be added some money because men do nothing, but you find that women do a lot of work. Again, people are trying to say that if you say that equity means giving the same amount of money to men and women, think about many things. Think about the risk in terms of skewed access to and control of resources. Think about the skewed issues around participation in decision making. Think about the gender roles and the burden of care and the unpaid care work. Think about so many other things and the social norms. Don't just think about the money, because that is not gender transformative enough. Next slide. I'm glad that in setting the stage, Professor Shroma talked about the parish development model. Yeah, the parish development model is seen to be an opportunity. It is seen to be an opportunity structure. There is a lot for the community to learn about the model, not only the community, even for the civil society, even for the different government structures to learn about this model, and of course the communities. One of the things that we noted is that if we develop the parish structure and such that in each parish there is a parish chief and a team that works with him, there is a system that has been established, then it is, because that structure is closer to the community, it is likely to work with the local councils to mobilize people for different government programs, but also to address the needs that are peculiar and risks peculiar to that area, because the parish is quite cohesive as a community. But in terms of issues around disability, we know that the program benefits persons with disabilities, i.e. 10% of the program funds in every parish are ring-fenced for people with disability. But again, this is for people with disability who can engage in income generation. So it is not a pure social protection program, it is more of a complementary social protection program, because if you are infirm, if you can't work, if you cannot engage in production, you may be excluded from these groups that benefit from these funds. So in other words, I want us to be very intentional at separating what is a complementary livelihood intervention from a typical social protection intervention. Next slide. In terms of the legal framework, basically this was summed up in the keynote by Professor Suroma, that we don't lack policies, we don't lack legislation, we have subscribed to most of the international legislative instruments that are very supportive in terms of gender, in terms of social protection, in terms of disability, but our challenge is with the implementation, because if you just look at the Constitution alone, in its objectives and principles, and it also has very particular sections that talk about gender inclusiveness as well as disability inclusion. Maintaining human dignity, if you look at our Constitution, the framers did a good job. But the extent to which we have put in place systems to translate that into practice, that is where there is the gap. Next slide. Again, you will find that the relevant provision is in the national objectives related to social security and social protection. I don't want to bore you by starting to recite the Constitution, but I've highlighted a few of very specific articles and sections in our Constitution that really allude to social security and social protection. You will read that for your details, so that I don't bore you with that. But yes, just to show that we have enough in terms of laws, we have enough in terms of policies, but there is a serious gap in system strengthening to implement these laws in terms of providing an institutional framework at all levels, including the community level, to be able to implement this. And also, when I come to funding, I will show you that we are lagging behind in allocation of funding to support social security and social protection. Next slide. So even when we talk about disability, there are so many legislation, including the Persons with Disability Act, the Pensions Act, the National Security Act now, which provides for the informal sector, extending to informal sector, the Workmen's Compensation Employment Act, but I am not going to bore you. That is all there in the report. So the takeaway here is that in terms of legislation, I think we are doing very well. Actually, we might be low and policy burdened, but where we are very light is building systems to translate the laws into practice in order to realize the benefits. Next slide. So now we get into the issue of fiscal allocation. And I'm giving the highlights. Again, the details are in the report. This slide is showing you trends in public and donor-supported investments to direct income support programs and the disability grant. And basically, the takeaway message here, I'm not sure if you can see from afar, but the takeaway message here is that the funding for both senior citizen grant and the disability grant have consistently increased in monetary terms over time. However, the funding for labor-intensive public works dropped at the end of financial year 2019-2020. You also know that most of the biggest program is NOSAF, Northern Uganda Social Action Fund, and then Dr. Deep. The Northern Uganda Social Action Fund is a loan we take from the World Bank, of course with some co-funding from government. So once there is any delay in renewal, then that alone affects the allocations. Next slide. I just want to again say that that slide is not here, but in the region, when you compare countries in the region, including Ethiopia, Rwanda, you got South Africa, Kenya, Uganda has the lowest allocation in terms of funding to social protection as a proportion of GDP. It is only 0.7%, and some countries are at 1.7%. South Africa is the highest with around 5% allocation. So our investment in social protection is still small. We need to grow this. Although we see some increase in allocation to certain programs, like the senior citizens grant, especially when government took over from donors and it funded the rollout of the program, we still have challenges in terms of overall allocations to social protection. This is why I guess when the oil money is about to come in, by the grace of God, if the oil money comes in, then we should pay attention to advocacy to ensure that a substantial amount of money is allocated to social protection funding. In conclusion, just to note that there are marked differences by gender regarding beneficiaries. Also to note that when we talk about gender, much as there are thresholds in terms of men and women benefiting, we did not find a lot. And of course, I want to recognize that there are guidelines produced by Minister of Gender on integrating gender into social protection programming. But when we looked closely, the feedback we got from the beneficiaries as we were consulting, these are yet to be fully implemented. So most of the gender is understood to be, how many men are benefiting? How many women are benefiting? But we don't go beneath that to say what are the social and gender norms prevailing. How can we include gender transformative elements that go beyond the numbers of men and women? At that level, we are not doing very well. How do we take into account issues of power dynamics between men and women, and how those cause risk and vulnerability? How do we take into account the gender roles dictated by the norms that skew most of the burden of work to women, and that increases risk, including time poverty, to be able to work and earn, issues around access to and control over resources of production, which is also skewed between men and women. Those issues are not taken into account. We, most of the time, go for the simple demographic, how many men, how many women, and we think that, well, that is where we are, so we need to do more to implement the guidelines that we have developed. And yes, we note that gender has been integrated in most of the social protection policies and programs. The challenge again is implementation and translating this into practice. Next slide. So just to restate, because the purpose of the study was to assess issues around gender inclusivity, that few programs do follow a gender transformative social protection approach. That goes beyond disaggregation of beneficiaries between males and females. So we almost end there. It is just more or less gender participation rather than gender transformative programming. Then there is less focus also on the complexity of women and men, especially in relation to their other social identities. So men and women, even when they are 8 years, they are not the same. I could be 8 years, but I have a disability. 8 years, I don't own a house. 8 years, but I'm internally displaced. 8 years, but I'm a mamboga, still limping on to sell my vegetables. 8 years, I didn't go to school, but we tend to take that bracket, that women, men, and yet there is a lot of heterogeneity that has a lot of implications for risk and vulnerability. We normally call that intersectionality in the language of gender. We call that intersectionality, where gender is only one identity, but you have to intersect it with many other risks and many other social identities that lead to risk and vulnerability. Then there are complementary interventions, yes, and we think that it is very important that gender that social protection is intentionally mainstreamed in these complementary interventions. Next slide. I'll now take you through a few recommendations, and I'm about to end. One of the very first ones, and you might agree with us, is that there is need to increase focus on comprehensive gender analysis and the harmonization of tools that go beyond disaggregation of beneficiaries between males and females to enable identification and application of gender transformative approaches. Because most of our programs were either gender blind or gender neutral, but not gender transformative. The guidelines, yes, are there. I want really to appreciate the expanding social protection program, the Minister of Gender, and the partners for producing the step-by-step guidelines, but we did not see these being applied in practice very well. There is need to appreciate the focus on the complexity of women and men, especially in relation to the other social identities that are beyond being male and female, that are beyond gender, that are beyond relationships between men and women, that are culturally defined, to see that there is a nexus between gender and poverty, gender and refugee status, gender and displacement, gender and illiteracy, gender and disability, and so on. We need to take that into account. Also, we really appreciate that the National Social Protection Policy was a game changer, and it is a very good policy, but there is need, it has been quite a while, and a lot has happened, so we need to review the National Social Protection Policy to take into account new developments, including the so-responsive social protection, which is important, including the increasing the focus on the social model of disability. Right now, I know the ministry is doing more or less a hybrid model. They have the medical, but I also appreciate that there are some aspects of the social model, but we need to be very intentional in terms of strengthening the focus on the social model of disability within the National Social Protection Policy. I know policies are reviewed after every 10 years, so maybe it is about 2 years to that time, but we need to be very proactive to ensure that that happens. There is need to disaggregate data, especially by categories of people living with disability, because in most cases, most of what we read, you find this proportion has disabilities, but the intensity, the severity, the different types are not taken into consideration well enough, and yet the type of disability has implications for risk and vulnerability. Next slide. And I'm winding up, actually. Okay. So.
Sorry for the disruption. I just want to announce that the Honorable Minister has arrived, so we want to welcome the Minister. And then once the Minister takes a seat, then we'll just let Paul complete the highlights.
Thank you very much.
Again, apologies for the disruption, but it's a very good disruption for sure. The minister will walk in shortly. It's important that Professor Paul will get the opportunity to present especially the recommendations for the minister. That's why we thought it's important that we could disrupt you for this. But I just want to remind us all that we're gathered here under this, the theme of improving synergies between social protection and public finance management. And also just to remind all of us that we're live on NTV, Uganda, of course. That's our #1 broadcaster in East Africa. There's no doubt about that. And I want to thank you, NTV, for this opportunity. We want to thank our partners, the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, as well as our funders, UNICEF, the EU, International Labour Organization, as well as the coalition that I mentioned earlier. For those of us who are following, please want to encourage you to join the conversation on social media. The hashtag is SPPFM Uganda. Please join the conversation and be with us in this workshop. At this moment, let's please stand up and recognize and welcome the Honorable Minister to this workshop. Honorable Minister, you're most welcome. Good morning. Good afternoon, Honorable Minister. It's still morning by the way. Okay. Honorable, thank you so much for joining us for the meeting. We are just going through the highlights of the presentation, but now that you have come first, I want to welcome you and also the audience. Please, let's clap for the minister. Let's take our seats. Honorable, you're most welcome. We have been going through the presentation of the study. Professor Paul Bukuluchi has been taking us through this. We are just at the tail end of the presentation. I will want to welcome him back so that he could just take us through, especially the recommendations. I think it's very important that you present this and so that the minister can get the basic highlights of your presentation. Thank you, Paul.
All protocol observed, particularly I would like to recognize our Honorable Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, who is at the helm of a very complex ministry that has so many dockets. Thank you very much for honoring our dissemination event. By the time you came in, we were concluding, and which is actually the right time. I'll just recast the purpose of the study such that I put in context the recommendations. So the purpose of this study was to assess the extent to which our social protection systems are gender sensitive and disability inclusive. So basically what we have done, we have been looking at the different programs of social protection that we have in Uganda. We selected some case studies and we were looking at the extent to which it is gender sensitive, but also looking at how they take into account issues of disability inclusion. So from the study, basically the key takeaway is that in terms of representation of categories of men and women, I think we are doing well almost in all programs. Of course, there are programs that focus more on the formal sector, like the public service pension scheme, where generally the observation was that most of the people employed in the public service tend to be men. Even those who tend to occupy most of the higher positions are men. So it means that if you are using pension, for example, the public service pension, they are likely to benefit more those who are more represented and those who occupy relatively higher positions. And we looked, for example, at also the National Social Security Fund, and we appreciated the new initiative that has been pushed to reach out to the informal sector, but our consultations reflect that there is more work that needs to be done because people are not yet aware about the fact that there is this opportunity structure that they can exploit to benefit from the scheme. So some community mobilization, demand creation, which the Ministry of Gender actually is best placed actually to do in terms of mobilizing communities. And we're also looking at how we can exploit the PDM, the Paris Development Model structures. We know that it is still growing, but how we can exploit those structures to further strengthen mobilization of people at the Paris level for participation and benefiting from different social protection programs. We looked at some programs also like the Senior Citizens Grant, and we do recognize that actually more women are benefiting from this program, almost close to 60%. But we did note that when we talk about gender, we are not only talking about body politics in terms of who is in which body, but there are things that are much more important around the gender beyond saying, oh, 60% are women, that we need to pay attention to. For example, issues around power relations between men and women and how those affect decision making. And if you have no voice and accountability in decision making at the household level, then those decisions made might push you into more risk and vulnerability rather than give you empowerment. So we think that as we implement social protection programs, we need to go beyond the disaggregation of men and women in terms of numbers to address some of those issues. And I was giving an example that when we were in some districts, we used the example of a weighing scale, and we were telling people, if you look at the gender roles between men and women on the weighing scale, and people would do, they would make curves, and with the women, they would almost fall off the cliff because the gender roles are so much. And these gender roles also can come with risks, like time poverty due to unpaid care work, that limit, participation of women in economic activities, in livelihood activities, and these need to be considered. The gender roles need to be considered as we do programming for social protection. We also noted that some programs like labor-intensive public works actually have done quite well in terms of ensuring that, in terms of thresholds, men and women, but they have gone beyond that to take into account the social norms, and gender norms in the communities to make sure that they enable women to participate. But still, the issue of time poverty is a problem that arises from the gender roles. So, and a recent study conducted by UBOS really showed that the issue of time poverty is a huge challenge. So because of that, we were recommending, and now I come to the recommendations, that there is need to increase focus on comprehensive gender analysis and to focus on gender transformative programming approaches as we implement social protection programs. That is the only way we can make them gender sensitive beyond thresholds of saying, oh, 50% of men and 50% of women are represented, because we know a woman is not just that number, but a woman is embedded within the social cultural systems and the social norms that are extremely important. We also noted that women and men are not homogeneous, they are heterogeneous. So as we think about women, we need to think about women, but from a perspective of that gender is just one social identity. But there are other social identities these women have, like for example, I'm a woman in Chikubo, but I also have a disability. I also didn't go to school. I also have 8 children. I'm separated or divorced. Or I could even be an internally displaced person. So we need to look at that complexity of a woman and man rather than just saying, oh, male, female. So this will make us to follow what we call an intersectional approach that recognizes that gender is one social identity, but there are also other social identities that increase risk and vulnerability. We appreciated the National Social Protection Policy 2015, that was a real game changer. And for the first time, we had a comprehensive programming for social protection, and we appreciated the guidelines that have been provided. But we think that it is important when it is time to review that report, because since 2015, there has been so many changes, including so many shocks like COVID-19, including the economic recession that is going on, including lots of issues around refugees, issues of emergency and humanitarian settings like shock-responsive social protection issues that have come up. So updating it is great to make it even more relevant. We also think that in terms of disability, it is extremely important to pay attention to the social model of disability, and we appreciated that the ministry is applying a hybrid of both the medical model and social model, but we would like to see, we don't want them to completely get rid of the medical model, because there are certain cases of disability which require that medical model, but we want more investment in addressing the environmental barriers, social and environmental barriers to disability, such that these people can be effectively included in the social protection interventions, but also in the social development processes. Next slide. And almost finishing. There is also need to advocate for translating of the good policies and laws that guarantee social rights of people with disability and also gender into practice, because we saw that we reviewed the laws and policies, and we saw that we have done a great job, and I think we need to pat ourselves. But then when it comes to investing to ensure that systems are built and that these policies are translated into practice, we still have a gap there between laws, policy, and implementation that needs to happen. But first of all, you need to have policies, you need laws, so we appreciate that is important, but it is time to strengthen our systems to implement the policies. The other issue that we recommended to pay attention to is that transit, again, from the medical model to the social model of disability to address the environmental and social barriers. Next slide. I want to thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Bokuluchi, for your very wonderful presentation. Let's give him another round of applause. In my view, he has done justice to this study. I think he has given us a very comprehensive document. That's by view. We'll leave that for you, the plenary, to also give him some feedback when we have a session for the plenary. But of course, Paul whispered to me just before you left that, please, while you make your feedback, just take note that his boss, I want to recognize her, Professor Josephine Aikire, the principal of CHUS, the College of Humanities and Social Sciences is here. So when there are any issues, you know, you will not have it very well. But also, you have to take note that the principal also has got our boss here, the Chancellor of Makerere University, Professor Suruma, who earlier on gave us a very great opening remarks. And he did have some very good findings and mentioned that this country does not lack policies. The only issue we have is implementation. And that has also come out in the presentation of this report by Professor Bukuluch. In my view, there are a few things that he probably did not mention, but that I'll just single one. When you are talking about challenges, I thought that you did not give the audience one challenge that we all think is a really big factor, the issue of corruption. You are very silent about it. But I also note that during his opening remarks, Professor mentioned something about issues of arrest, so you probably got scared to talk about some of these issues. Please, we'll let it be at that, and we'll let the audience have a chance. Before we have a session for the plenary, we are going to have some remarks from one of the officials from the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. I think he's over in the audience. And just to remind you, as he comes over here for his remarks, please just note that we are gathered here under the theme, Improving Synergies Between Social Protection and Public Finance Management. We're live on NTV, the #1 broadcaster in East Africa. I want to urge all who are following us on social media, please join the discussions. The hashtag is SPPFM Uganda. You're most welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Our dear chief guest, the Honorable Minister Betty Among Ongom, Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, the Chancellor, Makerere University, ladies and gentlemen, with great humility, I honor the protocol as defined today. I want to salute you all. Our chief guest, allow me on behalf of the technical team of Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and indeed on my own behalf, to warmly welcome you to this important occasion. When we are launching the reports on the study undertaken by Uganda Debt Network on gender sensitivity and disability inclusion. Maybe before I proceed, I'm Prosper Bionane Byomhumza. I'm the Commissioner Disability and Elderly Minister of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and I'm here to represent the Director Social Protection. And of course, given the sensitivity I have on disability issues and gender issues, that's why I had to join to make sure that we really give enough justice when we are discussing gender disability and disability inclusion. Our dear chief guest, allow me touch briefly on what Professor Bukuluchi presented, one being SAGE program. I think SAGE, Professor Bukuluchi was a perfect choice because we have walked together the journey of gender programming, especially in SAGE. In other countries which are implementing older persons' social protection programs, they use what we call a household model. A household model where they pick the head of the family to receive the grants. Uganda was very, very intentional to avoid that path, given the social laws and dynamics at community level that we know in Africa. So Uganda treats an older lady and an older man equally, and they both pick their grants independently without honoring the head of the family as the one to pick the grant. In terms of disability sensitivity under SAGE, yes, correct. We are a bit neutral. We are a bit blind in terms of disability inclusion. Our chief guest, we have received a petition from the, not a petition, but recommendations from the National Council of Persons with Disabilities, recommending that we need to lower the targeting age of persons with disabilities under the SAGE grant. That if we are using 80 years and above for all older persons, for persons with disabilities, we go down to 70. Actually, they have put 65. And they are saying we use the same experience we used under the NSSF midterm access to replicate this process. But this is a discussion in-house still, and we hope in the future it can be possible when we do further consultations. Social protection policy, Professor Bukuruti has talked to a lot of emerging issues, shock responsive social protection, and many others. I want to assure the House that the ministry proactively has worked on what we call the National Social Protection Strategy, and this strategy has made sure that it brings out all the emerging issues even before the expiry of the policy itself. The medical model vis-a-vis the social model of disability programming, again, this is an area that the ministry is tackling carefully. Currently, the minister has launched a study, what we are calling the disability blueprint. The disability blueprint is going to be a white paper. It's going to be a transformative document for this country to guide programming for disability for the next 20 years. And it's going to make sure that there is a balance between the medical model and the social model. And those of us who know the CBR models that we have been using successfully and impactfully. Regarding formats, Braille and others, I want to inform the House that the Constitution of the Republic of Uganda is now in the Braille format. The Persons with Disabilities Act is now in the Braille format. The Persons with Disabilities Guidelines are now in the Braille format, and many others. But thank you so much for raising an issue on formats where some of the sections of our communities really need to get these documents. Allow me also to, Chief Guest, allow me tell the organizers of this meeting that in the future we need sign language interpreters in the House. We were supposed to send one of the representatives in this meeting who is having a hearing impairment, but later when we checked on NTV, we couldn't see sign language services, and we decided to do a tweak in terms of representation of the ministry, which really becomes a social protection barrier, which becomes an access barrier. But it's for all of us, not necessarily for Uganda Debt Network alone. Honorable Minister, this piece of work by the Uganda Debt Network is a welcome initiative to the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development and the wider social protection sector in the country. It touches the very essence of social protection service provision, the promotion of equity and inclusion. The study helps us understand how well our social protection programming and delivery mechanisms have addressed the special and unique needs of the vulnerable population of Uganda. Honorable Minister, we participated in the validation of this report, and we thank Uganda Debt Network for giving us the opportunity to give more input at this stage. Generally, the findings and recommendations resonate with the pre-FACI view on what is obtaining in real practice, evidenced by the various monitoring and evaluation exercises of the ministry. So we are largely in agreement with the outcome of the study. However, in our engagement with the Uganda Debt Network team, we took it upon ourselves to advise them on how we can make this exercise in the future better in terms of having the ministry participate right from the design stage, the conceptualization stage, but all in all, we are fully in agreement with the study. The Chief Guest, Honorable Minister, this exercise has been done at the time when the ministry is undertaking the development of the National Social Protection Strategy. What a perfect timing. We have concluded consultations on this process with the development partners, the ministries, agencies, and some districts, and we are doing incorporation of the various input received before we subject the draft strategy to a validation exercise at national level. The strategy is intended to make our social protection system more comprehensive, more shock responsive, and more sustainable. We are happy that this study provides some insights into the fundamentals that we need to address in terms of gender sensitivity and disability inclusion. Honorable Minister, as you're aware, the ministry is having a conversation with UNICEF to work on the design for a child disability grant for this country. The professor who led the study was telling us how disability is not yet in the social protection lens. Social protection, by definition, is when you have predictable and regular grants or benefits given to the beneficiary. We are on the way in the pipeline towards the goalkeeper in terms of disability grants. We have moved from livelihood grants of loans, and we are now at giving groups grants which are not refundable. We are not yet at individual level, but that's where we are going. Working with UNICEF, we are planning to have a child disability grant for parents of children with severe disabilities. From our monitoring reports of the National Disability Grant, we realized that parents of children with disabilities and persons with multiple disabilities, especially those with mental disabilities, and the deaf and blind category who need to use tactile technology and other complex technologies to communicate to the public, they really need an extra affirmative action, what we call cash in aid in terms of disability inclusion. Honorable Minister, I would like to conclude by thanking Uganda Debt Network once again for the job well done, UNICEF for the support provided to this process, and all stakeholders for making it possible. I once again convey my warm appreciation to you, our chief guest, and all the guests and participants at this event for accepting to be part of this critical launch. I say this for God and my country.
Thank you very much, Prosper, for your very wonderful remarks. Please, let's give him another round of applause. Yes, just as I mentioned earlier, we are live on the NTV, but also want to make just a small alteration in our program. We will be signing out from the live broadcast by 1 p.m. So I want, in a very democratic way, to request us that we allow a slight alteration in the program. We shall have the Honorable Minister give our remarks, then we launch the report, and then after that we could have some brief session for plenary. It might be outside the live broadcast. I hope this is okay with all of us. Okay, thank you very much. So without wasting any time, I want to use this opportunity to, in a special way, invite Professor Suruma. Professor Suruma is, as we mentioned earlier, is a household name. We do not need to introduce him really. Everyone should be knowing him well. But I want him to step in the shoes of the chairperson of the Uganda Debt Network Board of Directors and take this opportunity to welcome the Honorable Minister, our chief guest, to give our remarks.
Thank you very much, Walter, for the honor. Honorable Minister, it is a great honor and privilege to have you with us, for you sparing your precious time and very busy schedule to be with us. But clearly you know that social protection is a very, very important problem for all of us individually and as a country. The time comes when a person is too old to go to cultivate, he's disabled, he cannot earn income, but he needs to eat, he or she needs to eat, he or she needs medicine, even the clothes to wear, even someone to help her to do the most vital things of life. And when there is nothing, then a citizen falls from being a decent citizen to what my German director of social security called a subhuman state. A person becomes less than human, the human dignity is gone. And we don't want our people falling into that category. We want to do everything we can to lift our people, the disabled, the men, the women, the children, the aged, out of that state into a dignified state of existence. So it's my privilege and pleasure on behalf of UDN and everyone present to have this opportunity to say kindly come and address the audience. Thank you very much.
The Chancellor, Makerere University, Professor Ezra Suruma, who is one of our backbone. If we see the robust recovery of our economy and the stabilization arising out of the structural adjustment policies shifting us into the private sector-led economy, and where we are at the level that we have stable growth, that we are now moving into the middle income status, we honor it to him who laid the foundation for this robust economic policy. So I want to thank you and the work you have done for this country. The UNICEF country representative of the MDS, professor from the university, and all the development partners and the civil society, I want to, on behalf of the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, and on my own behalf, thank the Uganda Debt Network for inviting us for the dissemination of the key study on building gender-sensitive and disability-inclusive social protection system, and also for taking time to delve into this very important topic and giving us the data and the recommendation. I think we need to thank them. As already alluded before, gender and social protection is one of the sub-programs under the Human Capital Development Program of the government of Uganda, under NDP 3. It is an intervention area that seeks to mitigate effects of socio-economic shocks among the deserving poor and vulnerable persons across the lifestyle. And the shock that we talk about, which we address in the NDP3, are very key and crucial for human development. As per the Uganda National Household Survey of 2019-2020, our country is still faced with a number of underlying socio-economic challenges that leaves a big number of our community in the vulnerable segment of society. For instance, poverty, we still have 20.3% of the population living before, and also in the context of poverty line, 1 in 5 persons are poor. So I don't know when the only problem is all of you seated here are not poor. Am I not correct? I would have counted and said, if you're 5, 1 of you in that, on that table is poor. But this table are not poor people. But when you walk across Kampala streets, probably downtown, when you find 5 people, 1 of them is most likely living below the poverty line. And below the poverty line, Professor will tell you, you might not be able to earn maybe even $1 a day, which is about 3,700, let's say 4,000. We also have the statistic indicating vulnerability across life cycle, where 43% of the population has a high likelihood of falling into absolute poverty. These are those that are economically very vulnerable. Today you might get 10,000 or 20,000, but the likelihood that in the next 1 or 2 months you will drop into the 20.3%, those living before and below poverty line, is very high among 43% of Ugandans. Of course, disability is 16% of the population have some kind of disability. So this study that has focused on disability is very important for us. The study also talks about gender-based violence, which is on the rise, and it states that 3 households out of 10 are likely to experience domestic violence, arising out of socioeconomic structural issues. And the study indicates that in most homes where people are economically stable, domestic violence is not very prevalent. But where there is poverty, domestic violence is more higher in those areas. The study also talks about subsistence sector, which is still high. 39% of households are still in the subsistence sector, and this subsistence sector sometimes are not very predictable in giving you income. And the vulnerability around it is also around the issue of lack of commercialization of agriculture, lack of irrigation scheme. So most likely this 39% are prone to praying to God whether in the next subsistence cycle of agriculture rain will be there or not. If the rain is not enough, the likelihood that there is total poverty is very high, because they depend still on subsistence agriculture. So some of these are factors that drive vulnerability, factors that increases the gender vulnerability. And so there needs to be an increased investment in social protection services, which this report addresses. And as government, there are remarkable strides that have been made so far in addressing the issue of poverty and vulnerability, which starts with our Constitution, and the Constitution mandates several sectors and ministries, one of which is the Ministry of Gender. And of course, we have put in place the policy and legal instruments like the National Social Protection Policy, the Equal Opportunities Policy, Gender Policy, Persons with Disability Act, and policy, among others. So this is only in the Ministry of Gender. But the human capital development shifts the burden of addressing the fundamental root cause of vulnerability also to other sectors. That's why the issue related to trade, lands, to ensure that access to land by persons with disability, by women, ensuring that in the Ministry of Agriculture we address those root causes that supports agriculture is very important. We also support and have continued to support and promote the establishment of a number of social protection institutional framework, for instance, the retirement benefits and pension schemes, which is regulated by the Uganda Retirement Benefits Regulatory Authority. Under the UBRA Act is in place. We also have the Public Service Pension Scheme, which provides social security to civil servants, the NSSF scheme, and additional 12 umbrella retirement benefit schemes, where to date 2.7 million participants under the different private sector retirement benefit scheme are either having their individual pension under their institution, or in one way or another supporting. But equally in the health sector, we have all those private sector that are providing social protection. The NSSF now has about 2.2 million under the Social Security Savings Scheme. Public Service has about 410,000, while those under occupational and umbrella schemes totals about 59,757. So this brings us to the estimate of 2.7 million Ugandans having some form of social protection, either through NSSF or the private sector-led organization and schemes, and then the one for the public. Government has also rolled out direct income support. I'm glad the Commission has elaborated on the, we have SAGE, which is very popular. I've noted that there is a petition and recommendation throughout the country that we should reduce the age of 80 years to 65 years. Others propose 70 years, others 75 years. But let me start by noting that the one of 80 years that is ongoing is one of the most popular programs I have seen. The only issue I see when I go to the field is where some able-bodied people like you sometimes will have children and take it again to those old people to look after. And you find an old person saying, you know, I have a grandchild, I need my money to take my grandchild to the hospital, and yet the social protection is for the old person, but the old person is now using it for the grandchildren. So we need now to look at that. It's very prominent when you go out there. We have the one for now to, when we looked at the issue of 80 years, lowering the age to 75 or 70, not yet viable because of our economic situation, we introduced a grant that can be accessed by between the people ages 60, is it 65 to 79 years. And you can have a group between 5 to 10 or 15 people. And you can apply for these grants to undertake any economic activities of up to 5 million Uganda shillings. And trust me, out there in the rural areas, people who are getting this grant, you see most of them are investing in probably buying goats, starting a poultry business, and small businesses. So that one is addressing that age group while we improve on the economy, and then would be able to lower the age from the current 80 years. The financial requirement, which we've done a study on, would not support us at this stage to lower the age, but the proposition to lower with all the scenario of 60 years, 65 years, 70 years, and 75. We've built all the scenario and the model, but we are now looking at the financial capacity to roll out the model. We also have the persons with disability grant, where 5 to 10 or 15 persons with disability also comes together, and they are able to also get a grant of up to 5 million. We also, of course, have other social programs for youth and for women, and the labor-intensive public works and the child-sensitive social protection program all supports all initiatives to support and cushion the shock. We have within the refugee areas response to displacement impacts project, and this is in the refugee hosting districts in West Nile, and we also within the Greater Kampala we have the program of Girls Empowering Girls project, which is supporting especially those girls that are either street children or those that are very, very vulnerable within the slum area, to support them. These programs have substantially benefited a large group of people because they are in groups and they are being supported. Of course, when I came, I had reference to the parish development model, which is the fundamentals to boost the rural economic sector. The 39% that cannot go into the bank and borrow because of their social status. They cannot get loan because they don't have collateral, because the land they have probably is not title. So the parish development model, which is meant to have 1 million shillings per person, and the household aspect is there, but the issue of quota that is embedded within the parish development model means in a homestead you can have about 3 people accessing. If you have a youth accessing under the youth quota, the women under the women quota, and the male under the mainstream quota, you will find in a household you have 3 million that you can work together to start an economic venture under the parish development model. Of course, I want to state that this parish development model has taken off in a very popular way, because government now, under the directive of His Excellency the President, has indicated that we will allow someone to utilize it with a grace period of 2 years. So if you have 1 million and you are into the agricultural sector and you are given 2 million grace period, I think it is a substantial period within which you can move a little bit. But it's not only, if you want to commercialize, there are other government programs that can be support you on top of the parish development model. And with the parish development model, 30% quota is for women, 30% for youth, 10% for older persons, and 10% for persons with disability. And this, we looked at it because of the vulnerability of these categories and realized if we do not put a quota that they will access, most likely if we had left it the way it is, majority of the people who would have accessed would have been men. But when you look at the categorization now, the vulnerable sector and segment of society, when handled well, will benefit and will be able to lift themselves out of poverty, and probably the kind of shocks that we see will be handled. I want to thank Ugandans, because when I go out there as the Minister for Gender, Labor and Social Development, most times I will find at least an old person who is telling me that they have a child or a relative that is supporting her. Vulnerability and social protection is about supporting someone who is vulnerable and unable to sustain themselves. Ugandans, I think, and Africa has created their own social protection network, where even when someone is suffering so much in Kampala, but there is an old person that requires going to hospital, they will borrow because they know they are strong enough to look for that money in the near 2 months, but they will look for money and make sure they take either their grandmother or grandfather or auntie or mother who is old to hospital, or send some sugar, send some money to take care of that. I think that is the biggest social network and social protection we have as a country. So I want to thank Ugandans that on our own we have inbuilt social protection that culturally has cushioned most of these people. If we were in the context of the developed world without this social protection and were relying only on the government social protection, many of our people would have died long ago. So I applaud the cultural context of social protection that supports the government social protection that we provide. Therefore, this study and the study report that we are launching today is very important because it provides a critical reflection on the extent to which social protection interventions in the country should be made gender sensitive and disability inclusive. I want to thank you for that aspect of the report which falls under our sector, and this report will add to the body of evidence which is required to enhance advocacy for social protection service delivery in general, and specifically in ensuring gender-sensitive and disability inclusivity in the programming process. And I want to pledge to you that we will study the report deeply and make sure that we integrate it in as we finalize our national protection strategy. With this, I want to thank Uganda Debt Network for the commendable piece of work and pledge our continued collaboration in the future, and thank UNICEF that we thank you for the support, technical and financial, for the study and all the initiative that supports government of Uganda country program. I thank all of you for coming, for making the contributions now and during the plenary that will be upcoming, and say on behalf of the Ministry of Gender, Labor and Social Development, I welcome this report. I thank you so much. Now, I don't know how we are supposed to launch the report.
It is coming. You kindly stand here. Yeah.
So, Professor has to come down.
Yes. Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. The book, the report is there. Janice, I think it will sit on the chair. And as the Honorable Minister launches the report, I want to encourage participants that your copies, if not on your tables yet, are going to be on your tables in just a few minutes.
Is there anybody who participated in the report that is coming? It is here.
Okay. So 3, 2, 1. Janice, did you give her 0?
So the report has been launched.
Thank you very much.
Read it and internalize it and give us as a Minister of Gender your opinion. And this is our report is here. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister, for launching the report. Which we shall definitely be able to use in partnership with the Ministry of Gender, of course.
So you are going to excuse me?
Yes.
I will leave you so that you know when I'm here you will not criticize me. So let me go so that you are able to criticize me well. Okay. Thank you.
So thank you very much, members, participants. And at this juncture, we will open up the session to the plenary. If you have anything to comment, any comments, any, input, and anything to say about the report, but also about the topic, this is the time. Feel free, you can put up your hand and then the microphone will be brought to where you're sitting. Yes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Nelson Mandela is my name. I'm a forensic auditor. So we have a few recommendations to make regarding, especially the PDM. The PDM money actually. I took part in some meeting with the National Planning Authority, the people in charge of ECD. There's a workshop that I participated in, and you see the way PDM is structured. PDM is structured in such for majorly financial inclusion. So if academia and Uganda Network can work together so that they can structure PDF in such a way that can take care of these social protection, like the social aspect of disability and the gender issues. So much as the 30% as we talked about that has been allocated to the youth or the women, but for me, from my experience with PDM, it's basically focusing on financial inclusion of these people, vulnerable people in our communities. Then also, I think the private sector should also be included in this inclusion of gender and disability. So not everybody in the private sector would go for the PDM, because some of these companies, they have the financial muscles to even do this inclusion on their own. So if we can strengthen the synergies, so not just focus on the civil societies only. Because I'm actually from the private sector, I'm an entrepreneur as well. So we know that there are some companies, I will give an example, UDN, Uganda Brothers, that have taken initiatives of including people with disabilities into their employment and opportunities there. So, and then also there should be monitoring and evaluation of all these initiatives. And audit, Office of Auditor General normally issues reports on the forensic audit, and majorly these reports, they are focused on financial matters, but if you can take the forensic audit further to even medical forensic and other aspects of the forensic. If you look at medical forensic and what is trending now in the country regarding the DNA issues, so this would help also protect these children and all these vulnerable groups in society that we are focusing on right now. So, and also more advocacy should be done
from the civil society should not just be about reports, but the advocacy from these societies must continue, not just from the civil society, and also everybody involved in these ecosystems. So partnerships should be strengthened, and private sector should also take lead in that move. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We would have loved to talk when the consultant is in the room, but it seems he has gone to hammer out the recommendations to the minister. Thank you very much, Uganda Debt Network, for this report. We've just tweeted that actually social protection is a social justice issue. And it's not just about distributing benefits. I've just got an interesting report from students who are doing internship in Guru Remand home. There are 6 females who are juveniles and 135 males who are juveniles. And it can just be brushed off as something, and then it can also be taken into the discussion of boy child and so on. But actually, it speaks also to the fact that what you've talked about as gender roles and so on, the care economy and so on, some of those roles make people emotive and they make them responsible. We see this also in terms of how when you go to the villages, men in their old age seem to be more isolated because they did not participate in these care economy roles that you are calling burdens right now. There is a correlation between the participation in the care economy on the day-to-day basis and what the person becomes in adulthood. That's why some boys, because they have nothing to do, tend to be lost. You don't have to blame parents for what, it's the social norms that you talked about. And the fact that then, beyond looking at transfers and so on, there's actually need to reorganize those social norms and ensure that actually people take the participation in this emotive kind of labor as a good thing in itself, and that then government will find you on the way while looking after yourself. But that actually we need to rethink and ensure that actually men storm the kitchen, storm the care economy, boys are in the care economy, so that they are actually able to care for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Any other comment, contribution? Yes.
Well, thank you, the presenter. I'm Richard Semper. I'm lecturer of economics at School of Economics. For me, I think we would address the issue that brings about the disabilities. We know the resources are scarce, but if we worked on those fabrics, for example, people get accidents, as if sometimes we don't so care, but that has an implication on how the resources this person has will be affected. Then also another one is on multi-sectoral engagement. We can't address everything within one sector, but if we bring all these resources that are within other sectors to work together to address this challenge, I think that will be a good addition. And also, the minister has mentioned about it, the social fabrics. Yeah, Ugandan our cultures at least prepare us to work as groups. So if we continue to build this, I think we can really have a good protection beyond one who's earning, and then we work as a group. That can speak to financing circles, among other initiatives. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard.
Yes, there's a microphone.
Yes. Thank you so much. My name is Biekwaso Charles. I'm a blind person. I work with the Uganda National Association of the Blind. First, I want to appreciate the commissioner and the DET network for really advancing our advocacy as regards the SAGE, that is the Senior Citizens Grant. Actually, as people with disabilities, we have so many risks. We may not even reach 80 years or even 60 because of the risks. You see people without disabilities, they are being knocked by cars. Someone has been talking about accidents. And then in the case of blind people, how many escape snakes, etc., etc. So at least if the age could be reduced to 65 or even 60, would be okay to get, I mean, that would be okay for us to get that money. Because we really get, even apart from that, there are also some post-disability effects. Like our colleagues who are physically disabled, especially those who got disability as a result of polio. This is what we call the post-polio effects. Someone was using crutches, after a certain age, then he will now even stop using the crutches. He will go back to the wheelchair or even crawling down. So you can imagine. So at what time will he or she reach the age of 80 to benefit from the SAGE grant? So I really emphasize that the age should be reduced for persons with disabilities. Then two, about PDM. I'm always in town during working days, but in the village over the weekends. If you can know the struggle for PDM, how the public is struggling for that kind of loan, it's quite really embarrassing. There's a lot of paperwork. People, even the 10% they are talking about for PWDs is not yet realized. Even some PWDs are not aware of the 10%. They are just mixed up and everybody is just moving up and down. So it is really quite interesting and something must be done. Apart from that, there are also some other individuals, including people with disabilities. They fear taking loans, much as they have, the minister has said, it is a grace period of 2 years. But still some people who are cowards, who don't want to take loans. They say, I will not take a loan, they imprison me. So I don't know what the government is going to do. Some people are really shining up to not take any loan, PDM. So I think we need to really either allay of fears, I don't know, sensitization, government should really do it again. Then there's also this EMIOGA. EMIOGA is a longer process. You can struggle and struggle getting it. You can even get it when you are already sick and you cannot implement. So the process is long. Paperwork is too much. I think we need really to do something to reduce the paperwork. Let's try to really increase some, those templates should be either simplified for some people really to understand them, much as they are putting some technical stuff like the parish chiefs, the sub-county chiefs, the CDOs, but they are also a bit puzzled, you know? Something, it is like it's very abrupt. People are not yet educated, so we need to do something. Otherwise, I thank DET Network for inviting Uganda National Association of the Blind. Actually, when I look around, I don't hear any other voice of a person with disability. I don't know why. Maybe next time I will recommend that we invite more persons with disabilities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Viekwaso. I think at this point, let's take just one more, and then we get back to our consultant to respond. Then we can see if we can have another round.
Next.
Thank you very much. My name is Jemima. I work with Nudipu. And Mr. Viekwaso, we are here. Yes. Looking at the definition of social protection, when we look at the social protection policy of Uganda, social protection is both in the public and private sector. But when I hear everyone in this room, we are putting the burden to the government and we are leaving less to ourselves, yet we can also do something in social protection. I love social protection, and I am studying something in regard to social protection. But I would also want to put across a question, apart from persons with disability, apart from looking at gender issues, have we looked at prisoners? In Uganda, we do not have a model to reintegrate prisoners back to society, because a person that has spent 15, 20 years in prison, can't there be a social protection model that is made for prisoners? Because after I have spent 20 years in prison, 25 years in prison, getting back to society is hard. Because even the people around here, if I asked who would want to marry an ex-convict, no one would, or little would want to associate with ex-convicts. So I want to advocate for ex-convicts, that we can draw a social protection model for them to also